I'm David Marcus with The Deal with Bob Profusek, a partner at Jones Day and head of the firm's M&A practice. Bob, thanks for being with us today.
Nice to be here.
What are we seeing so far this year in the realm of shareholder activism?
Well, it's soup to nuts. It's really everything. Activism isn't new. When you think back, it really started in the 80s. We called them, they were different. It was a different label then. Raider was a typical term we used. But it was a factor. And certainly in the 80s, there were a lot of Raider-like activities, but not nearly what it is today. Today, activism is an outgrowth, I think, of the tremendous amounts of capital that's available to be invested. And people have to have a theory for how they're going to invest it, and one of the theories is so-called shareholder activism.
And how does that affect a company who's dealing with an activist, either in the context of a transaction or outside of a transaction?
Well, in the context of a transaction, activism really comes at one or the other end of the spectrum. There are plenty of deals these days where activists initiate the process. They show up and say, company's not doing too well, better off being sold than continue.
And how much of that activity does the public see, does the market see?
Well, I think the public sees very little of it. The market sees a lot of it because information, of course, is instantaneous and everywhere. And when there's a 13D filed or even in big transactions, even before you get to the 5% level, which required for a 13D, an announcement of a position, the market reacts, and usually upward. There have been some pretty extraordinary examples of that. So the market knows that when an activist shows up, they're interested in a short-term benefit. Or in cases like Dell, for example, maybe the most written about and talked about deal in the last decade or so, when you think about it. After a deal's announced, they show up and say, we got a better idea. Don't do the LBO, do my recap or whatever I'm going to propose. So it's really a function of the tremendous amounts of capital that are available to managers who would call themselves so-called activists, that they can really move in and do a lot of things and a lot of big deals.
And how often does that supposed better idea actually lead to an alternative transaction as opposed to the initial transaction being priced a little more generously?
It's hard to say definitively. There are a lot of examples where activists have come into stock and it hasn't worked out so well for the activist. But I'd say the vast majority of the instances there is a short-term gain because the whole premise is do something in the immediate term to increase the trading value of the stock, either sell the company or do a recapitalization or break up the company, do whatever, and give a short-term gain. And of course, on the other side of that coin is the board and the management. And they're saying, gee, I thought we were supposed to be managing this enterprise or directing the management of this enterprise for the long term. Am I supposed to just give all that up? And the answer is, from their point of view, yeah, give it up. Show us the money, so to speak.
And that's usually what ends up happening, would you say?
Very often what ends up happening. Now, there are circumstances where activists show up into something short of a sale, return some cash to shareholders. There have been instances where management has been turned over, where the board's been turned over, where the company, think about Hess, for example. Hess is a very large company in the oil and gas business. When Elliott showed up, which is a notorious, well-known, I should say, shareholder activist, most of the people in the oil patch, and I know a lot of them, said, oh, these upstarts, they're not going to make the Hess family change direction. Well, I'm not so sure. In fact, they had a proxy fight, and Hess put up a white flag at the end of it, and Elliott said, no deal. Our guys are going on the board, and they have. And there's been a lot that's happened since then. They've sold their Russian assets. There's a rumor in the marketplace that some of their retail assets are on the block. They're doing a lot to create short-term value. But again, that's the fundamental issue here. Activist says, get me more value over today's my purchase price. Board and management are saying, geez, this is confusing to me because I thought I was supposed to be managing for the long term.
Thanks, Bob. For The Deal, I'm David Marcus.